It had its own army, 200,000 soldiers at its peak. It had its own navy, 40 warships, 150 merchant vessels, the largest private fleet in the history of the world. It printed its own money, ran its own courts, negotiated its own treaties with sovereign nations as an equal. It could declare war. It could execute people. It built its own cities. And it was not a government. It was a company, a trading company created to sell spices. The Dutch East India Company, known by its Dutch initials VOC, existed for less than 200 years. In that time, it became the most profitable and the most powerful commercial enterprise in the history of human civilization. At its peak, its value in today's money has been estimated at over $8 trillion. That is larger than Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Saudi Aramco combined. What it did to get there is one of the most extraordinary and most brutal stories in the history of the modern world. The story begins with nutmeg, specifically with how desperately Europeans wanted it. In the 16th and 17th centuries, spices were not a luxury. They were a necessity. Food preservation, medicine, status, flavoring. Spices represented something closer to what oil represents today. And nutmeg, which grew only on the Banda Islands, a tiny cluster of volcanic islands in what is now eastern Indonesia, was the most valuable of all. Nutmeg was so valuable that a single bag of it could buy a house in Amsterdam. European traders risked death at sea, in tropical disease, in storms and piracy, to bring it back. Whoever controlled the nutmeg supply controlled an almost incomprehensible amount of money. The Portuguese had reached the Banda Islands first in 1512. The Spanish followed. The English tried repeatedly to establish control. By the end of the 16th century, the trading competition had become so fierce, the markup between purchase price in Asia and sale price in Europe so astronomical, and the losses from competition so damaging, that Dutch merchants made a radical decision. They merged. In 1602, the Dutch Parliament authorized the creation of a single unified trading entity, the VOC, that merged all the competing Dutch trading companies into one. It was granted a charter giving it exclusive rights to Dutch trade east of the Cape of Good Hope, the right to build forts, the right to maintain troops, the right to wage war, and the right to enter into treaties with local rulers in the name of the Dutch Republic. It was the world's first multinational corporation, and it was born with a legal right to commit violence. What happened next on the Banda Islands is a case study in what unchecked commercial power looks like when there are no rules to stop it. The Banda Islands were home to around 15,000 people. They had their own leaders, their own culture, their own trading relationships with other island communities. They also had the only nutmeg trees on Earth. Between 1609 and 1621, the VOC, under a governor-general named Jan Pieterszoon Coen, one of the most cold-blooded administrators in the history of colonialism, systematically destroyed the Banda Islands population. Villages were burned. Resistance was met with mass execution. Communities that had traded peacefully with European merchants for over a century were hunted by VOC soldiers and Japanese mercenaries hired specifically for the campaigns. By 1621, the population of the Banda Islands had been reduced from approximately 15,000 to approximately 1,000. 93% gone. The survivors were enslaved and forced to tend the nutmeg plantations now owned entirely by VOC shareholders sitting in Amsterdam. The shareholders received their dividends. The dividend payments were, for most of the VOC's existence, extraordinary. The average annual return on investment over the company's 200 years of operation was around 18%. Investors in the early years routinely received returns of over 100%. The people of the Banda Islands were not consulted about any of this. The VOC expanded far beyond nutmeg. It controlled the clove trade from the Molucca Islands, the pepper trade from Java and Sumatra, the cinnamon trade from Ceylon. It established trading posts and fortified towns from South Africa to Japan. It ran the only foreign trading post Japan permitted to exist during Japan's 2-century period of near-total isolation, a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki Bay called Dejima, from which Dutch merchants traded under strict Japanese supervision, forbidden to practice Christianity or display any Christian symbols. At its height, the VOC ruled over millions of people across the Indonesian archipelago, administered courts of law, collected taxes, maintained infrastructure. It was, in every practical sense, a colonial government that answered not to a king or a parliament, but to 17 shareholders in Amsterdam, known as the Heren 17. The 17 Gentlemen. The VOC collapsed in 1799, not from outside attack, from corruption so total that it became a standing joke in the Netherlands. VOC, people said, stood not for the company's Dutch name, but for Vergen onder corruptie, perished under corruption. The Dutch government nationalized its debts and dissolved it. The territories it had administered became the Dutch East Indies, which eventually became Indonesia. $8 trillion, 200,000 soldiers, 15,000 people, reduced to 1,000 for the price of a spice. History is not always made by governments. Sometimes it is made by balance sheets. Subscribe. A new story every single day. Like this video if the scale of it hit differently than expected. Comment below what detail stopped the scroll. Next time. The woman who ruled the most powerful empire on Earth for 63 years, outlived 4 prime ministers, and was so terrifying that foreign leaders rehearsed conversations with her for weeks in advance. Queen Victoria. And the story behind the image is nothing like the image.